No human is immune to making mistakes, but some errors carry devastating and often irreversible consequences. Among those are fatal misjudgments that demand the highest caution. One such tragedy involved a group of wildlife officers who underestimated the danger of a grisly encounter. Despite their expertise, they learnt the hard way that nature doesn't grant second chances. Join us as we delve into their harrowing story. On January 8, 2025, the Siberian dawn was barely a suggestion on the horizon, and the winter air was sharp and stinging against exposed skin. Snow blanketed the remote forest near the village of Bikovo, muffling sound and lending an eerie stillness to the landscape. Pine trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches heavy with ice. The only breaks in the white monotony were the deep grooves of snowmobile tracks cutting through the forest floor and the faint signs of disturbance. Claw marks etched into bark and paw prints leading into the deeper thicket. The wildlife team, comprised of 12 seasoned officers from the Siberian Forestry and Wildlife Division, had been dispatched early that morning after repeated sightings of a large grizzly bear near the outskirts of Bikovo. The bear, known to villagers for its unpredictable aggression, had raided livestock pens and destroyed storage sheds in the past. Its sudden proximity during winter, a time when bears typically remained dormant, was troubling. The plan was straightforward: track the bear, safely sedate it, and relocate it to a more remote and secure part of the forest. The team had conducted similar operations countless times before, always with caution and precision, but this morning was different. Despite the routine briefing, a single overlooked detail would turn this mission into one of unimaginable tragedy. As they dismounted their snowmobiles and secured their rifles, the officers spread out in a wide formation. Lieutenant Viktor Sokolov, a grizzled man with over 2 decades of field experience, led the group. His breath fogged the air as he surveyed the landscape, his eyes narrowing at the faint path of tracks disappearing into the woods. The bear had moved recently. Its prints were deep and crisp against the snow, and disturbingly close to a series of shallow indentations that suggested frequent movement. What the team failed to recognize was the subtle but critical presence of additional tracks, smaller, scattered ones partially obscured by snowfall. Cub tracks. The realization, which should have raised immediate alarm, went unnoticed. The group advanced cautiously, rifles slung and tranquilizer darts at the ready. The forest closed in around them, the tall trees swallowing the pale light filtering through the sky. Frost clung to their jackets and masks, and the rhythmic crunch of boots against snow was the only sound breaking the silence. Near a dense thicket, the tracks converged, leading to a hollowed-out den beneath the exposed roots of a fallen tree. The snow around the entrance was disturbed, trampled by heavy paws. Steam rose faintly from within, an unmistakable sign of a breathing, living mass. Victor raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. They formed a loose perimeter, hearts racing as adrenaline sharpened their senses. One officer loaded a tranquilizer dart, the syringe glinting in the dim light. But before the dart could be fired, the forest exploded. A roar ripped through the air, guttural and filled with rage. It was the primal sound of a mother grizzly defending her young. Snow sprayed into the air as the bear, a massive, muscular beast covered in thick, dark fur, burst from the den. Her eyes gleamed with fury and her breath steamed in the frigid air. Flanking her were 2 cubs, frightened and clinging to her shadow. The officers scrambled backward, the orderly formation collapsing into chaos. Shouts turned to screams as rifles were raised too late. The bear, propelled by sheer maternal instinct, charged with terrifying speed. Her paws tore through the snow, claws glinting like knives. The first officer, Sergei Ivanov, barely had time to react. The bear struck him with a single swipe, sending him crashing into the snow, his chest torn open. Blood sprayed across the white ground. Another officer tried to fire his tranquilizer but fumbled with the safety mechanism. The bear slammed into him, her jaws clamping down on his shoulder, crushing bone and sinew. Panic gripped the remaining officers. They scattered in different directions, some slipping on the ice as they tried to retreat. Victor shouted for order, but his voice was drowned out by the bear's roars and the screams of his men. One by one, the team fell. An officer named Dmitri managed to climb a low branch, but the bear, undeterred, reared onto her hind legs and swiped him down. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Blood painted the snow in grotesque patterns, a stark contrast to the pristine white canvas of the forest. Victor fired a shot, the rifle's crack echoing through the trees. The bullet grazed the bear's side, enraging her further. She wheeled around and charged directly at him. He stood his ground, reloading as quickly as his trembling hands would allow. But before he could fire again, the bear was upon him. Her weight crushed him to the ground, and his screams were abruptly cut off as her jaws tore into his neck. The remaining officers, gripped by terror, fled into the forest. Their footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the bear, her cubs, and the mangled remains of their comrades. For hours, the forest remained deathly silent, except for the occasional rustle of branches and the soft whimpering of the bear cubs. The mother bear, breathing heavily, stood amidst the carnage, blood matting her fur. Her protective instincts had driven her to kill, and now she guarded the scene with unrelenting vigilance. When backup finally arrived, the horror before them was almost too much to comprehend. 9 officers lay dead, their bodies torn and broken. The snow was soaked with blood, and claw marks scarred the trees. The bear was found several meters away, collapsed from exhaustion and blood loss from the bullet wound. Authorities made the grim decision to euthanize the animal, though it was clear she had only acted out of instinct. Her cubs were sedated and taken to a wildlife rehabilitation center, spared the fate that had claimed their mother. The aftermath of the attack sent shockwaves through the region. The loss of 9 officers in a single operation was unprecedented, a stark reminder of the unforgiving wilderness and the thin line between predator and prey. Experts emphasized the critical importance of understanding wildlife behavior, particularly the dangers of approaching a mother bear with cubs. In Bikovo, the villagers mourned the fallen officers, their bravery forever etched into the region's memory. The forest, indifferent to the tragedy, remained as it always had, wild, untamed, and unforgiving. And for those who dared to venture into its depths, the lessons of that morning would never be forgotten. On the night of March 3, 2023, a bitter wind swept through the isolated backroads of Montana. The landscape was blanketed in darkness, with only the faint glow of the moon reflecting off patches of stubborn snow clinging to the ground. Sophie Kramer, 22 years old and working the graveyard shift at a small gas station off Highway 212, pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she finished wiping down the front counter. The station was a lonely outpost on the edge of the wilderness. Trees crowded the horizon, their skeletal branches swaying in the wind. The nearest town was miles away, and customers were few and far between at this time of night. Sophie liked the solitude, though. It gave her time to think, away from the constant noise of people. She had grown up in these rugged parts and was no stranger to the wild, but even seasoned locals knew to keep their wits about them during the long winters. That year had been especially brutal. Heavy snowfall and plunging temperatures had driven wildlife closer to human settlements in search of food. Deer sightings near the gas station had become almost routine, and rumors of wolves prowling near town had put everyone on edge. But it was the grizzlies that haunted people's thoughts. Starving and desperate after months of limited foraging, they were unpredictable and dangerous. Sophie locked the front door and walked out to the pumps, her breath visible in the frigid air. The smell of gasoline lingered, sharp and metallic. She double-checked the nozzles and secured the pump covers before heading toward the station's pickup truck parked nearby. Its metal body gleamed faintly under the dim station lights. That was when she saw it, a hulking shadow moving near the edge of the tree line. Her heart skipped. At first, she thought it might be a wandering moose, but the shape was all wrong. It was broader, lower to the ground, and unmistakably powerful. The figure shifted into the light, and Sophie's breath caught in her throat. A grizzly bear. It was massive, easily weighing over 600 pounds. Its fur was matted with patches of mud and snow, and its eyes gleamed with a wild, desperate intensity. The bear's long claws scraped the frozen ground as it moved forward, sniffing the air. Sophie realized with a sinking feeling that the bear had likely caught the scent of food, perhaps residual trash or spilled snacks near the pumps. Her pulse quickened. Bears this time of year were unpredictable, their hunger overriding any natural wariness of humans. Sophie knew she needed to act fast. She climbed into the truck and slammed the door, the metal frame offering a thin sense of protection. Her fingers fumbled as she pressed down on the horn. The blaring sound shattered the stillness of the night, echoing through the empty landscape. The bear froze, its ears flicking back in irritation. For a moment, Sophie thought it might retreat, but then it lowered its head, muscles tensing, and charged toward the pumps. The ground seemed to tremble under the beast's weight. Sophie's stomach knotted as the grizzly barreled straight into one of the gas pumps, its massive body colliding with a metallic crash. The pump wobbled dangerously, and the bear, undeterred, swiped at it with its claws, tearing through the metal casing. Sophie's breath came in ragged gasps. She knew she couldn't just sit in the truck. If the bear damaged the fuel lines, the entire station could go up in flames. She threw open the door and sprinted toward the station's entrance, her boots slipping on patches of ice. The bitter cold bit at her face, but adrenaline drove her forward. Behind her, the bear roared, the sound primal and deafening. Sophie didn't dare look back as she reached the door and yanked it open. She stumbled inside, slamming it shut and locking it. Her fingers trembled as she hit the emergency shutoff switch for the pumps, hoping to cut the fuel flow. Outside, the bear continued its rampage. It swiped at the damaged pump, dislodging fragments of metal and plastic. Sparks flew as the bear's claws struck the internal wiring, and Sophie's worst fear became a reality. A small fire ignited near the base of the pump. Flames licked upward, casting an eerie orange glow across the snow-covered ground. The bear recoiled, confused by the sudden heat, but its hunger kept it from retreating. It circled the flames, growling and swiping at the burning debris. Inside the station, Sophie's chest heaved as she watched the scene unfold. Her mind raced through possible solutions, but there was nothing she could do. The fire was small for now, but it could spread quickly if it reached the fuel reserves. The bear, agitated and desperate, made one final charge at the flames. The heat singed its fur, and it let out a furious bellow before finally retreating back toward the woods. Its massive form disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the flicker of fire and the scent of scorched fur in its wake. Sophie didn't waste a second. She grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and burst through the door, the frigid air hitting her like a wall. She sprinted to the burning pump, her boots crunching over shards of metal. The extinguisher hissed as she sprayed the foam over the flames, choking out the fire before it could spread. Smoke lingered in the air, acrid and stinging. Sophie coughed, her throat raw, but relief washed over her as the last embers died out. The danger was over. Her legs wobbled as she stood there, the cold seeping into her bones. The station was eerily silent, the chaos of the past few minutes leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. Sophie's breath plumed in the air as she surveyed the damage. A mangled pump, scorched earth, and deep claw marks etched into the concrete. Authorities arrived within the hour, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Wildlife officials confirmed that the grizzly had likely been struggling with food scarcity due to the harsh winter. They tracked its movements back into the forest, hoping to relocate it farther from human settlements. Sophie was hailed for her quick thinking, but the encounter left a lasting impression. She had always respected the wild, but that night had shown her just how thin the line was between coexistence and catastrophe. The gas station was repaired, the pump replaced, but the memory of the grizzly's desperate charge would linger in Sophie's mind forever. On October 15, 2024, the bitter winds of Siberia swept through the vast and untamed forests of Irkutsk. Pine trees stretched endlessly toward a gray sky, their branches weighed down by the first hints of winter frost. The wilderness was ancient and merciless, home to creatures both majestic and deadly. Few ventured this deep without purpose, and even fewer returned unscathed. Viktor Smirnov, a Russian billionaire infamous for his opulent hunting expeditions, thrived on danger. His life had been built on conquest, corporate, personal, and in the wild. To him, the remote forests of Irkutsk represented a new frontier, a place where he could add the elusive Russian grizzly to his growing collection of trophies. The hunting party he led was a carefully curated group of elite marksmen, seasoned guides, and armed security personnel. Each member had been handpicked to ensure a successful and luxurious expedition. They traveled in style, their camp outfitted with high-tech gear, gourmet provisions, and reinforced tents to protect against the Siberian cold. By mid-afternoon, they had ventured far from civilization, their convoy of rugged vehicles navigating treacherous paths deep into the wilderness. Tracks in the snow hinted at wildlife nearby: elk, wolves, and perhaps even the grizzly Victor had come to claim. Spirits were high among the team, who reveled in the challenge ahead. As the day waned, the group set up camp in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. A fire crackled, sending embers swirling into the frigid air. Victor paced restlessly near the edge of the camp, his sharp eyes scanning the tree line. Earlier, he had spotted movement in the distance, a massive shadow that had vanished into the forest. He was certain it was a grizzly. Ignoring the protests of his guides, Victor made the fateful decision to track the bear alone. Armed with a high-powered rifle and dressed in state-of-the-art hunting gear, he radiated confidence. Years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and today they urged him forward. The thrill of the hunt was irresistible. The forest swallowed him whole, its ancient silence broken only by the crunch of his boots on frozen ground. The scent of pine and decaying leaves hung heavy in the air. Shadows lengthened as twilight descended, casting eerie shapes among the trees. Victor's breath plumed in the cold as he moved deeper into the wilderness, his eyes sharp for any sign of his quarry. The bear found him first. Without warning, a thunderous roar shattered the stillness. Victor barely had time to turn before the grizzly exploded from the underbrush, a blur of muscle, fur, and raw fury. The beast was enormous, easily exceeding 700 pounds, its coat thick and matted from the harsh Siberian elements. Instinct kicked in. Victor raised his rifle, but the bear was already upon him. The sheer force of the collision sent him sprawling backward, the weapon skittering across the ground. Pain lanced through his ribs as he hit the frozen earth. The bear's massive paw raked across his chest, shredding his thick coat and tearing into flesh. Blood blossomed across Victor's torso, hot against the cold air. He gasped, adrenaline dulling the agony as he struggled to crawl toward his rifle. The bear roared again, saliva flying from its jaws as it circled him, eyes wild with aggression. Victor knew predators. He had hunted countless apex creatures across the globe. But this was different. This was survival. He lunged for the rifle, fingers brushing the stock just as the bear struck again. Its jaws clamped down on his shoulder, crushing bone and sinew with terrifying strength. Victor screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from his throat. He thrashed violently, his free hand clawing at the ground. The bear dragged him through the snow, its grip unrelenting. Blood smeared across the white ground, marking their path like a grim trail. Victor's vision blurred, but he fought against the encroaching darkness. His survival instincts, honed by years of dangerous expeditions, refused to surrender. Desperate, he reached for the hunting knife strapped to his belt. His fingers trembled as he unsheathed the blade. With a surge of defiance, he drove the knife into the bear's side. The beast roared in pain, its grip faltering. Victor stabbed again, each movement fueled by raw determination. The bear released him, staggering back, its flanks slick with blood. Victor's breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to his knees. Pain racked his body, but victory flickered on the edge of his consciousness. He had wounded the beast, perhaps enough to send it retreating, but the grizzly was not done. Snarling, it charged again, eyes blazing with primal fury. Victor braced himself, knife clenched in his trembling hand. The impact was devastating, driving him back onto the frozen ground. His head struck a rock, and darkness crept at the edges of his vision. The bear's jaws closed around his neck. Back at camp, the hunting team had grown uneasy. The forest was too quiet, the fading light casting an ominous pall over their surroundings. When Victor failed to return, a search party was hastily assembled. Armed with rifles and thermal imaging equipment, they moved swiftly through the forest, following the trail he had left. It didn't take long to find the scene. Blood stained the snow, a gruesome testament to the struggle that had taken place. Shredded fabric and scattered gear littered the ground. The search party's breaths caught in their throats as they spotted the massive bear looming over Victor's broken body. Shots rang out, the bear collapsing under a hail of bullets. Its massive form slumped to the ground, steam rising from its wounds in the cold air. The men rushed to Victor, but it was too late. His body lay twisted and torn, his eyes staring blankly at the darkening sky. News of the attack spread quickly, shocking the hunting community and beyond. Viktor Smirnov, a man who had conquered the world's wildest landscapes, had fallen in the very wilderness he sought to master. The bear, later found to be malnourished and aggressive due to environmental factors, was examined by wildlife officials before being incinerated. Victor's death served as a grim reminder of nature's unforgiving power. Even the wealthiest and most prepared individuals were not immune to its dangers. The Siberian wilderness, beautiful and brutal, had claimed yet another life. and as the winds howled through the trees that night, it was as though the forest itself mourned the loss of one more soul who had dared to challenge its might. On August 3, 2024, the sun crested over the jagged peaks of Canada's Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows over a landscape both breathtaking and perilous. The trails near the park were known for their untouched beauty, a wild expanse of dense forests, rocky ridges, and alpine meadows. For Kyle Bennett, a 29-year-old hiker from Vancouver, it was paradise. An experienced and avid outdoorsman, Kyle thrived in environments that challenged him. He was the kind of person who found solace in solitude and purpose in pushing himself further than most dared. The Rockies, with their towering cliffs and endless wilderness, were the perfect place for his weekend escape from city life. That morning, he had set out early, his backpack stocked with essentials, bear spray clipped to his chest harness, a GPS device strapped to his wrist, and enough provisions to last 3 days. He followed a narrow, winding trail that snaked along a steep ridge. Below, a dense carpet of evergreens stretched to the horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and wildflowers. As he ascended, the path grew narrower, flanked by loose rocks on one side and a sheer drop on the other. Each step demanded careful attention. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the cool morning air, and his boots scuffed against the uneven terrain. He paused briefly to take in the view, a glacial lake shimmering far below, its surface glass-like in the early light. It was moments like these that reminded Kyle why he loved the wild, but the wilderness was unpredictable, its dangers often hidden until it was too late. Unbeknownst to Kyle, a mother grizzly bear and her 2 cubs were foraging just beyond a thicket of dense brush not far from the trail. Grizzlies were common in the area, but most encounters ended without incident. The bears would often hear or smell humans long before contact and retreat into the woods, but a mother bear with cubs was a different story altogether, territorial, protective, and dangerously aggressive if she perceived a threat. Kyle's steps were deliberate, his focus on the uneven path ahead. The wind shifted, carrying his scent through the trees. The mother bear's head shot up, her ears pricked. Her cubs, oblivious to the sudden tension, continued pawing at the ground. The bear huffed, her massive body tensing. Kyle rounded a bend and froze. The brush rustled violently as the grizzly emerged, her fur bristling, eyes dark with primal fury. Her cubs, sensing the shift in their mother's demeanor, scurried behind her. Kyle instinctively reached for the bear spray, but the bear was already charging. The ground trembled beneath her weight, claws raking the dirt as she closed the distance with terrifying speed. Kyle's pulse thundered in his ears. He fumbled with the nozzle, his heart racing as adrenaline flooded his veins. The bear's roar was deafening, a sound that pierced through the stillness of the mountains and shattered any illusion of safety. Before Kyle could raise the canister, the bear collided with him, the impact sending him sprawling onto the rocky trail. Pain shot through his shoulder as he hit the ground hard. The bear's massive paw struck his backpack, claws tearing through fabric and gear. She snarled, her breath hot and rancid. Desperation surged through Kyle. He kicked out, his boot connecting with the bear's snout, but it only seemed to enrage her further. She bit down on the strap of his backpack, the force lifting him partially off the ground. His fingers clawed at the dirt, seeking any anchor to resist being dragged. The bear's strength was incomprehensible. She yanked him down the rocky slope, his body slamming against jagged stones. Blood oozed from gashes on his arms and legs. His vision blurred, but survival instincts overrode the pain. He thrashed wildly, attempting to unclip the backpack that the bear had latched onto. With a final desperate tug, the clip released, and the pack came free. Kyle tumbled down the slope, landing on a narrow ledge. Dazed and bleeding, he tried to pull himself up, but his body was battered and unresponsive. Above him, the grizzly stood momentarily confused, the backpack clamped in her jaws. She shook it violently, scattering its contents across the rocks. Kyle's reprieve was brief. The bear dropped the pack, her eyes locking onto him once more. She bounded down the slope with astonishing agility, her massive frame moving with lethal grace. Kyle's breath came in ragged gasps as he scrambled backward, his fingers finding the edge of the cliff. There was nowhere left to go. The bear lunged, swiping at him with claws that glinted in the sunlight. The force of the blow sent him teetering over the edge. Time seemed to slow as he hung in the air, gravity pulling him inexorably downward. The rocky face blurred past him before he struck a jagged outcrop. The impact was catastrophic. Bones shattered and the air was forced from his lungs. His body tumbled like a rag doll, colliding with rocks and branches until he came to a halt on a narrow plateau far below. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the earth. The world around him faded into a haze of pain and shadows. By the time search teams arrived the following day, the scene was grim. Kyle's lifeless body lay crumpled on the plateau, his injuries fatal. Claw marks etched into the dirt told the story of his desperate struggle. His torn backpack, shredded by the bear, was found higher up the slope. The mother grizzly was tracked and euthanized later that week. Authorities determined that she had likely acted out of instinct, perceiving Kyle as a threat to her cubs. The incident sent shockwaves through the hiking community, serving as a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in venturing into bear territory alone. Kyle Bennett, a man who had always respected and revered nature, became a tragic symbol of its unforgiving power. His death led to increased warnings and safety measures in the region, but for those who knew him, it was a loss that no precaution could ever mend. The wilderness, as beautiful as it was brutal, had claimed another life, a sobering reminder that in the face of nature's raw force, even the most experienced are not invincible. On July 5, 2024, the forest in British Columbia was a world of untamed beauty. Sunlight filtered through towering evergreens, casting dappled patterns on the moss-covered ground. Birds flitted between branches, their calls harmonizing with the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. The air smelled of pine and earth, fresh and wild, untouched by civilization. Three friends, Liam, Natalie, and James, trekked through this remote wilderness, their laughter occasionally breaking the serene atmosphere. They had planned this trip as an escape from their busy city lives, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. All experienced hikers, they carried light packs filled with essentials, their boots caked in mud from the winding trail that had led them deep into the forest. The trail had grown narrower and more rugged as they ventured further from marked paths. Natalie, ever cautious, had suggested turning back earlier, but Liam had brushed off the idea. He was always the bold one, eager for adventure and unafraid to push boundaries. James, laid back and easygoing, usually went along with whatever Liam decided. Natalie, though more prudent, found herself swept up in their enthusiasm despite her reservations. By midday, the friends reached a secluded clearing bordered by dense thickets of wild berry bushes. The sweet scent of ripe fruit hung in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest. Bees buzzed lazily among the bushes, undeterred by the human presence. As they paused to catch their breath, Natalie noticed something ahead, a flash of movement, subtle but unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat as she spotted a grizzly bear, its massive frame partially obscured by the foliage. The bear was feeding, its snout buried in the berries, oblivious to the intruders. Natalie's instincts kicked in. She whispered a warning, gesturing for them to retreat quietly. James's face paled, and he took a cautious step back. But Liam, eyes gleaming with excitement, saw an opportunity. Without a second thought, he pulled out his phone and started moving closer to the bear. The thrill of capturing a photo this close to a wild grizzly was irresistible to him. Natalie's expression twisted in fear, but Liam paid no heed. The bear was majestic, its fur thick and golden brown, muscles rippling beneath its hide as it moved. Liam's boots crunched on the ground, snapping a twig. The sharp sound shattered the bear's calm. Its head jerked up, dark eyes locking onto Liam. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, vibrating through the air. Natalie's breath caught in her throat as the bear's posture changed, ears pinned back, body tense. It was no longer a peaceful forager, but a creature ready to defend itself. Time seemed to freeze. The bear charged, each powerful stride closing the distance with terrifying speed. Liam's face shifted from excitement to horror as he stumbled backward. The primal force of the bear was overwhelming, unstoppable. James and Natalie didn't wait. Instinct took over and they sprinted toward the dense trees, adrenaline surging through their veins. Branches whipped against their faces as they fled, the sounds of the attack echoing behind them, snarls, thuds, and Liam's desperate screams. Liam tried to run, but the bear was faster. It struck him with a paw, claws slicing through fabric and flesh. The force sent him sprawling onto the ground, gasping in pain. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and sticky. He scrambled to get up, but the bear was on him, its jaws clamping down on his shoulder. The agony was unimaginable. Liam thrashed, his fists pounding against the bear's thick hide, but it was like punching stone. The bear shook him violently, its teeth tearing deeper. His vision blurred, pain blotting out all coherent thought. Desperate, he reached for a nearby rock, his fingers slick with blood. He managed to grip it and smashed it against the bear's head. The bear roared, momentarily loosening its grip. Liam tried to crawl away, but his body was weak, trembling from shock and blood loss. The bear wasn't finished. It lunged again, sinking its teeth into his leg and dragging him across the ground. Liam's screams faded into ragged gasps as his strength waned. The bear's ferocity was unrelenting, driven by instinct and adrenaline. Back in the trees, Natalie and James stumbled to a halt, their chests heaving. The forest was eerily silent now, save for the distant rustle of leaves. Fear knotted in their stomachs as they realized Liam's screams had stopped. James's face was ashen, sweat dripping down his temples. Natalie's hands trembled as she fumbled for her emergency beacon. Her mind raced, torn between the impulse to run back and the harsh reality that they could do nothing against a grizzly. They activated the beacon, hoping rescue teams would arrive swiftly. By the time authorities reached the scene hours later, the forest was still and heavy with the aftermath of violence. The bear had retreated, leaving behind a gruesome scene. Blood stained the ground, mingling with torn shreds of fabric and scattered gear. Liam's body lay motionless, battered and broken, a stark reminder of the ferocity of nature. The responders secured the area, their expressions grim as they documented the evidence. It was a tragedy that could have been avoided, a single reckless decision that had cost Liam his life. Word of the attack spread quickly, making headlines across the region. Wildlife officials reiterated the dangers of approaching bears, emphasizing that even the most seasoned hikers were not invincible against the raw power of the wilderness. For Natalie and James, the memory of that day was indelible. The forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, had become a haunting landscape marked by loss. They carried the weight of what they had witnessed, a reminder that nature was not just a backdrop for human exploits, but a force to be respected and feared. Liam's death was a somber lesson etched into the wilds of British Columbia, a cautionary tale for those who ventured too close to the edge. On February 9, 2025, the Arctic winds swept relentlessly across the barren expanse near the northernmost tip of Norway. The ice glistened under a pale gray sky, an endless stretch of white broken only by jagged ridges and patches of exposed rock. Temperatures hovered well below freezing, and the air carried a biting chill that numbed exposed skin within seconds. An international research team had set up camp near the coast, their brightly colored tents standing in stark contrast to the desolate landscape. Dr. Daniel Schmidt from Canada, a seasoned climate scientist, stood outside adjusting one of the solar-powered instruments. Beside him, Dr. Hana Suzuki from Japan meticulously recorded data on a tablet, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Professor Lars Jensen from Germany, a glaciologist with decades of field experience, was busy securing ice core samples in insulated containers. The team was part of a critical climate change expedition aimed at studying the rapid melting of Arctic ice. Despite the harsh conditions, spirits were high. They had already gathered valuable data that would contribute to a better understanding of the planet's shifting climate. The landscape, though hostile, held a raw beauty that captivated them, vast, untouched, and ancient. As evening approached, the temperature plummeted further. The researchers retreated to their tents, huddling around portable heaters and ration packs. The smell of dehydrated meals mingled with the sharp scent of frost. Their camp was meticulously organized to minimize wildlife encounters, with food stored in secure containers away from the sleeping area. Even in this remote part of the Arctic, polar bears were a constant threat. Unbeknownst to the team, a large male polar bear had been tracking their scent for miles. Hunger gnawed at the animal's lean frame. The shrinking ice had made hunting seals increasingly difficult. Driven by instinct and desperation, the bear's black nose twitched as it followed the faint aroma of human food and warmth. The night was dark, illuminated only by the pale glow of the aurora borealis flickering across the sky. The researchers were restless, their tents creaking under the pressure of the wind. Snow swirled around the camp, obscuring visibility. Then came a sound that pierced through the howling wind, a deep, guttural growl. The bear emerged from the darkness, a hulking mass of muscle and fur. Its yellowed eyes glinted with primal intent as it lumbered toward the camp. The animal's breath formed thick clouds in the freezing air, its powerful paws crunching through the snow. The first tent it reached collapsed under a brutal swipe of its paw, fabric tearing like paper. Metal stakes were yanked from the frozen ground, and the contents scattered across the ice. The sudden chaos jolted the team awake. Dr. Schmidt was the first to react. He unzipped his tent and stumbled out into the frigid night, his heart racing. The scene before him was surreal. The bear, massive and menacing, stood amidst the wreckage, its breath steaming in the cold. His instincts kicked in. He knew the protocol for polar bear encounters, but no amount of training could fully prepare anyone for the sheer terror of facing such a creature. The bear roared, a sound that reverberated through the frozen landscape. Dr. Suzuki and Professor Jensen scrambled out of their tents, their faces pale with shock. The bear turned its attention to the movement, its body tensing. Dr. Schmidt shouted to get the bear's focus back on him, raising his arms to appear larger. His mind raced, searching for a solution. The flare guns were stored near the supply crates, a critical mistake in hindsight. There was no time to retrieve them. The bear charged. Dr. Schmidt didn't run. He knew that fleeing would trigger the bear's predatory instincts. Instead, he stood his ground, hoping to buy time for the others to reach the flare guns. The bear closed the distance in seconds, its claws glinting in the faint light. The impact was devastating. The bear's paw struck Dr. Schmidt with brutal force, knocking him to the ground. Pain exploded in his chest as claws tore through his heavy jacket and into his flesh. Blood spattered across the snow, vivid against the white backdrop. The bear roared again, its massive jaws snapping dangerously close to his face. Despite the agony, Dr. Schmidt fought back. He kicked at the bear's snout, his boot connecting with a solid thud. The bear recoiled slightly, but its fury only intensified. It clamped down on his arm, the pressure unbearable as bones cracked. Dr. Schmidt's screams echoed across the ice. Meanwhile, Dr. Suzuki and Professor Jensen had managed to retrieve the flare guns. Their hands trembled as they loaded the devices. The bear was relentless, dragging Dr. Schmidt through the snow as it shook him like a rag doll. A flare shot into the sky, burning bright red against the darkness. The sudden burst of light and heat startled the bear. It released Dr. Schmidt, who collapsed onto the snow, barely conscious. Another flare followed, hissing as it arced through the air. The bear growled, its aggression wavering. The researchers fired 2 more flares in quick succession. The bear, disoriented and wary of the strange lights, finally retreated into the darkness, its massive form disappearing into the swirling snow. Dr. Suzuki and Professor Jensen rushed to Dr. Schmidt's side. His face was ashen, his breath shallow. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the ice. They applied pressure to his wounds, their hands slick with crimson. The cold was both a blessing and a curse. It slowed the bleeding but threatened to push him into hypothermia. A distress signal was sent, and a rescue helicopter was dispatched. The team fought to keep Dr. Schmidt conscious, but his injuries were too severe. By the time the helicopter arrived, he had succumbed to his wounds. The bitter cold claimed what the bear had left behind. The following days were a blur of grief and formalities. Dr. Schmidt's body was transported back to Canada, where his family and colleagues mourned the loss of a brilliant scientist and a courageous soul. The bear was tracked down and euthanized, a necessary but somber decision. The attack made international headlines, a grim reminder of the dangers inherent in Arctic research. It led to stricter safety protocols and renewed discussions about the impact of climate change on wildlife behavior. But for those who had been there, it was a tragedy etched into their memories, a night when the unforgiving wilderness had claimed one of their own. Dr. Daniel Schmidt's legacy would live on in the data he had gathered and the lives he had touched. But the Arctic, beautiful and brutal, remained unchanged.